Welcome you all for Crisis in Orientalism by Edward Said, a critical analysis. Edward Said. Edward Said was born on 1935 in Jerusalem to Palestinian Christian parents. Being a Palestinian, his early life was characterized by numerous moves and feelings of displacement. Because of his Palestinian background, Said took an inherent interest in the topic of Middle Eastern politics and international relationships. Middle East. It refers to the region of Arabia, Asia, Turkey, Egypt, Iran, and Palestine. The term came into widespread usage as a replacement of the term Near East in 20th century. In 1947, the United Nations allowed for the partition of Palestine into separate Arab and Israeli states, which led to a series of military conflicts over many years. Edward Said supported the idea of Palestinian state and argued not against Israeli rights but rather against nationalistic powers such as the US that pushed particular agendas. He continued to support the idea of a peaceful accord between Palestine and Israel. Said's doctoral thesis turned into his first book, Joseph Conrad and the Fiction of Autobiography, which was generally well received and recognized for its contribution to comparative literary studies. His writings are simple, straightforward, and he protects the colonial tradition and is an important figure in post-colonial studies. He is placed among such intellectual cultural critics of our times as Antonio Gramsci, Theodore Adorno, Raymond Williams, and Michel Foucault, whose ideas helped him build his own anti-authoritarian or freedom position. Orientalism. Orientalism is one of the most influential texts of the 20th century. Published in 1978, it is a well-known, best-selling, and most debated work. Before that, what is meant by Orientalism, or Orient, or Oriental? What does the title Orientalism refer? The title Orientalism refers to a false beliefs of Europeans regarding the native populations of Asia or the Middle East. So what does an Orient mean? Orient literally means the East. According to Said, it signifies the Middle East, Asia, and territories that were once a part of one or another European empire. Said uses the word Orient to signify a system of representation framed by political forces that brought the Orient or the East into Western empire, Western learning, and Western consciousness. The West uses the word in its relation to the East. It is a mirror image of the inferior, the alien, or the other. The book was also condemned as being anti-Western because Said focused on the negative aspects of the West. The book Orientalism thus exposes the hidden agenda or the hidden plan of imperialism to construct the Orient. Imperialism in the sense, the power or influence through colonization. The book Orientalism is divided into 3 chapters: the Scope of Orientalism, Orientalist structures and restructures, and Orientalism now. The extract, Crisis, is the concluding part of the first chapter of Orientalism called the Scope of Orientalism. The essay exposes the limitations of Orientalism. Said focuses on the falsification of the East by the West. Said's goal is to explain how the power of West continued to persist and dominate the East. Said begins the essay by describing what constitutes a textual attitude. So we are going to see first what is meant by textual attitude according to Said. According to Said, textual attitude also means textual information. Said claims that texts provide a sense of knowledge about something unknown, and this sense of knowledge reinforces the idea that information provided in the text is accurate or truth. Said points out that it is a fallacy or false to assume that the world can be understood through text, because Text can provide false textual information, so it is foolish to apply what one learns from books to real life. Set refers to novels, Candide and Don Quixote, written by Voltaire and Cervantes respectively. These two writers are from Western world of France and Spain, and they can provide in their novels only abstract or suppositional philosophical argument rather than real world evidence. In other words, these writers were indifferent to natural world and their philosophical speculation proved useless. For Sid, there are two situations that favor textual attitude or textual information to reality, so it helps one form their own attitude. When human beings encounter unknown place, they have to depend on what they have read about it. Travel books and guidebooks belong to this category. For example, when a person travels in strange lands, he may fall back on travel books for support. Such books lends great authority to text rather than reality. In simple, such books cannot provide real truth and real experience. The second situation favors textual attitude as the appearance of success. In this situation, if the book proves right, then it guides the reader to read more books. A book, for instance, which tells that lion is fierce will acquire authority of the reader really meets a lion that is fierce. In addition, if the book also tells the reader how to handle fierce lions, then the reader will develop textual attitude, which means his increasing reliance on the written word. Millions of men and women seek reality and truth about the East in the countless books on the subject rather than actual encounter with reality. The entire West fills the text in large number with strange portrayals of Arab land and its people. The way an Arab was presented came to represent all the Arabs and the entire Arab world. Unfortunately, academics, institutions, and governments will surround the book with greater prestige. Such books can create not only knowledge but also a tradition, or what Foucault calls a discourse. Discourse, according to Foucault, means a system of thought that governs the knowledge obtained by a person. This is how Orientalism evolves as a tradition, an authority, or institution. It has become an imperial institution and an unchanging discourse. The Western mind of lowering East has become a familiar habit of thought, feeling, and perception. By the end of 19th century, Britain, France, and other imperialist powers, with their Orientalist findings and researches, colonized the countries of the Orient. Colonialism had projected the Orient as in need of protection and enlightenment. So missionaries and civilizing schools influence all over the Orient countries. Propagation of Christian religion was the main aim of these societies. The West treatment of Islam also offers a clear example of how the West or the imperial institution can never change. Thus, Orient acquires a familiarity that is distorted or out of shape. Orientalism since late 18th century and 19th century was dominated by Britain and France as a discipline or a field of study. For scholars and researchers, East or Orient was always an unchanging and a peculiar object. Friedrich Schlegel, the 18th century poet and philosopher, had studied and compared Sanskrit German languages with other families of languages such as Chinese, American, or African. His discussions of language reflected his subjective or personal opinion about communities, religion, and race. In Walter Scott's novel, The Talisman, the principal character, Sir Kenneth, fights in Palestinian desert. The way Sir Kenneth generalizes about people is typical projection of the Western Orientalist mentality. Scott's knowledge was probably derived from the previous writers like Byron and Beckford, which was severely confined. The dichotomy between East and West has served to lump the entire Orient into one category. This dichotomy or division fails to acknowledge the legitimate or lawful distinction between groups. The agreement between the two provoked only crisis in the history of Western thought with the Orient, and this crisis continues even today. So, two alternatives opened before Orientalism: to ignore new developments as if nothing had happened, to adapt old ways to the new. Sid draws on contemporary scholars to support his ideas. Abd al Malik, an Egyptian scientist, used the history of Orientalism to describe how the Orient became an object of study. Sid also provides a portion of a lecture given by H.A.R. Gibb in 1945 at the University of Chicago and another lecture given in 1963 at Harvard University, in which he uses same discriminatory language used to characterize the Orient. The crisis thus continues and dramatizes the difference between text and reality. Orientalism lives and thrives within its limitations, which result from its disregarding other people and their culture. This fixed picture, age-old and no longer useful, is still nurtured by the West. This proves to serve nothing but widen the gap between the Orient and the Occident. Occident, that is, the countries of the West, especially Europe and America. Towards the end, Sid calls true historian to study the realities of the Orient, to eliminate the mold into which the West has placed it. A true historian should have a serious task of grounding realities and restoring the humanistic values. Thank you.